If there's one thing I've learnt in racing, it's that certain people will do anything they can if they think it increases their chances of winning a race. And that's and I don't think that just applies to racing. I think it applies to any sport. Ethics can become, if there's a possibility of increasing your chances of winning a race in any sport or winning a competition in any sport, ethics go out the window. We see it in soccer. You see it in athletics. You see it in pretty much all sports in the Olympics. People will bend the rules as much as they can, do things which, if they were being honest with themselves, they shouldn't be doing. If there's an increased chance of winning.
Hi, I'm Karen Luke.
And I'm Mita Osborne.
And welcome to this episode of our podcast, Changing Rein.
Our guest today is John Berry, racehorse trainer, racing journalist, historian, and former Mayor of Newmarket, the town that is probably the headquarters of horse racing. It has 2 racecourses. It has something like 70 trainers. It has 50 miles of grass gallops. John, it's a great pleasure to have you here. I suppose this podcast is about the sustainability, the future of horse sport in general. And we are really interested in perspectives from different people, from our guests who come from all sorts of aspects of the horse world. We are interested in the journey that people have taken to get to where they are today. And I suppose pivotal moments along the way, because I don't think anyone's life journey is ever totally straightforward. So maybe you might give our listeners a little bit about your background and how you ended up where you are today.
Yes, I ended up in Newmarket, came here, as probably quite a lot of people do, for a short period, and that was 37 years ago, I think. Came here for 3 months 37 years ago, and I'm still here. It's for people within racing, it's a place that everyone that's got an involvement in racing probably comes to Newmarket at some point in their lives, and quite a few of them end up staying. And of the ones that stay, even if you go away for a while, I always say you could go away for 10 years and come back and you'd just walk in and there wouldn't be that much change. It'd be the same people, same everything. So many people come into racing for different reasons, but I just wanted to be a jockey, so I started working for a trainer in my gap year, and well, I'm still on my gap year, you might as well say. But I've been working in jump stables for about 3 years, and I probably had enough race rides to discover that I wasn't good enough to be a jockey. I came to Newmarket in May 1987, supposedly just working here for 3 months, but liked the place, so I stayed. And once you've realised you're not going to be a jockey but want to carry on working within the game, you work for other trainers, and the curiosity to try and do it yourself takes over. So I started training 30 years ago, and I'm still here. You learn so much more when you have to stand on your own 2 feet. And Bill O'Gorman is retired now. He's a very good trainer in Newmarket. He said, you're only really ready to start training by the time you've been doing it for 10 years. So I'm still learning now. But yeah, that's basically how I came to it. And I mean, as regards to writing and just interest in racing in general, interest in Newmarket in general, they're all part of the same thing. I think if you love racing, you love reading about it. If you love reading about it, you probably like writing about it. If you love the sport now, you love the history. If you love Newmarket, you want to get involved in the local community. I probably went on to Newmarket Town Council 13 years ago. I've been the mayor. I was the mayor 1 year. No, I'm still a town council. It's all just part of the same thing. Just the racing life, the Newmarket life.
So much of what you're saying resonates with me, John. I think the first time I went to Newmarket was actually 1987 too, but that was because we were going to the Newmarket, the December sales, the broodmare bloodstock sales at the end of the year. So that's our annual pilgrimage to Newmarket. And maybe for the benefit of listeners, you might just describe Newmarket, because it is quite unique.
Well, Well, there was an Australian jockey who came to England about 10 years ago, called Claire Lindop, who'd been successful in Australia, and she'd been champion jockey in Adelaide 2 or 3 years. And I think she'd left school and got totally sucked up in the jockeying thing, and it took over her whole life. And so she arrived in England and was getting sort of busman's holiday. She did a bit of race riding, but just a bit of seeing the country. And there was an article in the Racing Post when she came here, and the interviewer, so something that she said really stuck in my mind. And it was a summer where there was an Australian Test team were touring England at the time, the cricket team, and I think he said to her, what are there any things you're particularly looking forward to about your summer in England? She said, well, I've got a ticket for the first day of the Lord's Test, and I'm really looking forward to that. And the other thing is, I'm really looking forward to going to Newmarket, because I view Newmarket as being to racing what Lord's is to cricket. And I mean, I don't think you could really sum that up better than how she did it.
It's almost like a place of pilgrimage for racing fans.
Exactly. In the same way that the Australian cricket fan wanted to see an Ashes Test at Lord's, and someone who's a racing fan and a cricket fan would want to see an Ashes Test at Lord's and would want to come to Newmarket.
What I think is interesting that your wife, Emma Berry, who's a racing journalist as well, she wrote a piece on your website. I'm just going to read it here. John runs something of a free-range racing stable, which wouldn't be at all eyebrow-raising if he trained on a farm in the middle of nowhere. But in Newmarket, alongside the vast strings of blue bloods, his methods can be viewed as unusual. Would you tell us a little bit about those free-range methods, or what makes for a free-range stable?
Well, I suppose around a lot of places around the world, but a lot of people, particularly that train expensive horses, they feel the need to treat them like ornaments, that they put them on the shelves and polish them, and they feel the need to keep their property in pristine condition. And of course, if you've got livestock, you've got a choice of either giving the horses a bit of freedom or keeping your property in pristine condition, and you can't do both. Even in dry weather, they sort of do a bit of damage, and you can tell when they eat all the grass. But particularly in wet weather, it just becomes a muddy farmyard, and most people don't like doing that. Particularly in Newmarket, most people, they want an Arab sheikh to be able to drive in at any time and say, "Gosh, isn't this is as smart as my palace?" But I've always worked on the basis that it's a stable and it's not a palace. And what a stable means, it's there for the benefit of the horses. You've got to give them a bit of freedom. Even prisoners nowadays, even murderers, I don't think you're allowed to put them in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. So we're lucky enough that we have got quite a lot of space, because this is an old yard, and it probably dates back to middle of the 19th century. And of course, middle of the 19th century, the town was smaller, so we were on the edge of town, and there was a lot less pressure on land acreage than there is now. So if you wanted to build a stable with 35 yard with 35 boxes in it, which at the time would have been a very big stable and now is very small, you'd get a fair bit of land. So we probably got the acreage that you'd get now if you were wanting to build a 150 box stable. So we're lucky enough to have a fair bit of land that we can just make little enclosures and put a horse here, put a horse there, and that one's sensible, just let him wander around. Those two get on well together, so we'll put them in there. But so we can get them out of their boxes and let them wander around. But the drawback is that if this mythical Arab sheikh does come, he'd probably come around the corner and say, "This doesn't look anything like my palace whatsoever. I'm moving on." But a stable's got to be run for the benefit of the horses, and it's like, I think a lot of people, they don't realise or lose sight of the fact that horses, they're not humans. They're not domesticated in the way that we are. I love nothing better at the end of the day. Get in, have a bath, hot bath, clean myself up, go to settle down, eat my dinner, feeling clean. Horses aren't like that. If you get a clean horse, when I get clean in the evening, I don't even want to go out again because I don't want to get dirty again. If you get a horse really clean and put him in a field, the first thing he'll do is roll. When we open the curtains and look outside and it's raining, we really don't want to go outside. But if we said to the horses, right, it's raining, we're not going to let you out today, within an hour or two, when they think they should be going out, they'd be kicking the door and they'd be looking restive. They just want to get out. And when they got, it's like most people find that if they build a field shelter, they're very often taken aback that the horses never go in them. So yeah, I think it's a very easy road to go down, thinking that horses' brains work the way humans do, and they want their creature comfort priorities are the same as humans. And I try not to get dragged down that road.
Can I ask you a question? You mentioned about wanting to keep everything pristine and so that if the mythical shake comes down, it looks like a palace. One of the things that you do often hear with owners is they also want the horses pristine, and they're worried that horses get injured when you let them out. Could you talk a bit about your experience of letting horses out, and do they hurt themselves more than if they're kept in, or do you find that that's actually less so?
Well, I think they hurt themselves less simply because they don't go stir crazy and they don't do stupid things. Of course, they still do stupid things, and you'll get the odd injury, whatever you do. A real time for injury is when horses are box resting and they're injured and they have to stay in, and they often do stupid things in the box. So, yeah, if you're aspiring to create an environment for horses, for humans, for anything, in which accidents never happen, you're going to be disappointed, whatever you do. But I'm pretty sure that over the years, we have fewer mishaps for allowing the horses to let off steam. And, say, like, turning them out, they don't all just... Well, we're very lucky I don't have any colts, so if you've got colts, it's a complicating factor. So fillies and geldings, they can mix. But you pretty soon know the horses' characters. And the times you get into trouble, if you get horses that are really bossy or horses that are really timid, if there's a bunch together and there's a really timid one, the really timid one will be the one that will get hurt. And if you get a really bossy one, there'll probably be something going on. So you just learn the character. If you're putting 2 or 3 horses here and a couple there, you make an educated guess at who'll get on with what. And then if you find they're not getting on, you change things around a little bit. If the horses aren't stir crazy, they won't do stupid things they will do stupid things as exercise, but they won't do things as often or as stupid as a really fresh horse will do. So you've automatically cut down your injury risk just by doing that.
I think that's such a really interesting perspective. Thank you.
I'm interested, John, in your stint as mayor and your term on Newmarket Town Council. That's unusual for a trainer, I would think. But I think I'm just wondering, does it give you insight into what the people of Newmarket think about racing? That's such an important part of the town. Have you learned something from the good citizens of Newmarket that you might not have been aware of if it wasn't for your involvement?
It certainly enabled me better to see the bigger picture. I probably learnt, the people of whom I'll have learnt most will be the other councillors. There are 18 councillors and they're drawn from all different backgrounds. And within Newmarket, we've always been very well treated by the town council. In university towns, Oxford and Cambridge, the phrase is town and gown. There's a divide between the university and the town. and there had to a certain extent been a divide between the racing community and the town, and I'd rather there wasn't a divide between the racing community and town. To me, that they're so integral to each other. We're a big part of the town, but Newmarket itself's a big part of racing around here. I don't want there to be a divide, and I thought if I can bring the two sides together, probably implies that there was a bigger divide than there was, but they needed to be more together than they were, and I would like to feel that I've done something to help that.
And tell me about, I suppose, the general topic of the future of racing. I mean, you're saying racing's so integral to Newmarket. Does this come up in conversations, I suppose, particularly with your fellow trainers within the racing community in Newmarket? Are people talking about it, or is all this talk overblown, or where do you think we're at?
Well, I think all around the world, you can't take the future of racing for granted. It's becoming just using animals for anything. As you know, there are probably more people that question that. It's a little bit hard to debate things because people are going to believe what they want to believe, and my belief is it's nonsense to say that you can't use animals for things, because it's the animals and the humans are a symbiotic relationship. As long as you're treating your animals well, whether it's keeping horses for racing, keeping them for equitation, just as pets, whether it's your dogs, your cats, there are, whatever you're doing, I think for the animals, the pluses massively outweigh the minuses. And if people didn't keep them, pretty soon there wouldn't be any. And I think if you love dogs, you want it to be, here there are groups that don't like people owning dogs as pets. They're against dog ownership. They're not. They've been quite vocal against racing, but they're against dog ownership as well. They're against any kind of animal ownership. If you do that, well, the future for the individual animals is, the old phrase, nasty, brutish, and short. And the future for the breed is there just won't be any. People won't breed them. And I want to see a world in which there are animals. And if people don't have animals for a purpose, there won't be any animals. And for a purpose includes having them as pets, as companions. Obviously, the more you use them, the more obvious it is. There's you race them. Some will get injured. But yeah, for me, the pluses massively outweigh the minuses. Having animals that we use is the only, as I say, and I include keeping as pets as using them, is the only way that we will retain animals in the world. Otherwise, humans will just take over. And if you're using the animals, you can't just say, I'm using them to keep them alive, because you actually have to be using them correctly. You can't be abusing them. But I'm like to think that I do, and vast majority of people involved in horse ownership, whether that's within racing, whether that's within general riding or with anything, I'd like to think that they do. But we just can't take it for granted that mindset will always be accepted. So yeah, we can't take anything for granted, but I'd like to think that things will continue as they are for the foreseeable future. I think all you can do is do what seems to be the right thing. Hopefully keep things going as they are while you can.
So you mentioned about sort of using the animals and using the horses for racing. If we take a slightly different perspective and think that rather than trying to get rid of horses, maybe some of the people who are articulating concerns about not only racing, but all sorts of equestrian sports, actually are concerned about the well-being of the horses. Do you see things in racing that you think could be done better, or so that perhaps some of those concerns could be addressed?
Yes, I do. Yeah, you always do. I do what I think what I think's right. Yeah, I mean it's up to other people to do what they think right, but I think whatever line you're involved in work, you'll look around you and you'll always say, "Oh, well, that's not the way I'd have done it." Yeah, but I think in most racing jurisdictions, the authorities are very good at trying to make sure things is done as ethically as possible and continually raising the standards. I think the leadership, you can never rely on the positive change coming from within. It has to be sad, in things like, you see, there has to be rules. In any competitive sport, people will do what they can to get an edge. You saw that in Australia with Darren Weir. You see it in cycling with Lance Armstrong. If there's one thing I've learnt in racing, it's that certain people will do anything they can if they think it increases their chances of winning a race, and that's and I don't think that just applies to racing. I think it applies to any sport. If there's a possibility of increasing your chances of winning a race in any sport or winning a competition in any sport, ethics go out the window. We see it in soccer. You see it in athletics. You see it in pretty much all sports in the Olympics. People will bend the rules as much as they can, do things which, if they were being honest with themselves, they shouldn't be doing. If there's an increased chance of winning, but I don't follow other sports that well. But I do follow racing around the world to know that in pretty much every jurisdiction, the people who are running it will do what they can to curb things like that and try and make sure that people do behave ethically and correctly.
I think one of the complications in racing as opposed to other sports is that it involves an animal, that it's not just people, it's not just Lance Armstrong trying to gain the competitive edge over his fellow riders. It's the fact that there's an animal involved, and people will consider doing unethical things with animals in that drive to win. And I think that's, as Karen says, I think that is probably at the root of the concerns of quite a few of the people who are saying, there are problems in racing. These are external people. If there was one thing that racing could do, is there anything we should be doing to try to address these concerns?
By these concerns, do you mean address the concerns of people looking in, or making sure that things are done right? Because that I know they're similar, but that's not exactly the same thing. Because I do think to a certain extent, all you can do, people will always believe what they want to believe. I think what you can do is you can try and make sure that you do things as ethically as possible, and you need to be pretty ruthless to get to the top in any concern. I'm nowhere near the top, and I don't think I'm ruthless enough. But I think all the individual can do is do what they can do, and all that the authorities can do. As I say, you look around, you see people think, I wouldn't necessarily. That's not what I'd do. But the leadership has to come from above, and it does come from above. The authorities tend to be pretty good at things which were considered the norm a generation ago, no longer considered them.
Yeah, I know exactly where you're coming from, John, and I suppose one of the things I say to people when they talk to me about racing and its ills, if you like, I say, well, actually, racing is probably the most regulated. It is the most regulated sport involving animals in the world. So we do have leadership. I suppose I wonder sometimes whether leadership knows, it's fine. You can say in the abstract they do the right thing, but I do worry sometimes that there isn't enough knowledge or understanding of what that right thing actually is. And maybe there should, look, I'm probably a bit biased here because I spent an awful long time in my life thinking that we were doing the right thing. And really, it's only in the last 4 or 5 years when I've kind of explored this area more that I've come to realize there are certain things that happen in racing that maybe we should be looking at again. Now, what you've described in your yard sounds idyllic. It sounds absolutely wonderful. I'd love to be a horse in training and with John Berry. But I just wonder sometimes whether our leadership is as open to change or to considering what's out there in terms of knowledge.
Yeah, I think very much so. They're administrators rather than horsemen. One change that I would like to see made is something that is quite common in some stables. You overwork a horse, you get a bit of soreness in the joints. They put an anti-inflammatory injection into the joint capsule, which the people that do it will tell you it has a healing effect, but basically it just has a desensitizing effect. And you can't run when there's traces of that in the bloodstream, and the traces of that in the bloodstream will remain for about 2 weeks. But the desensitizing effect will last for considerably longer. I never do that. I just never do it. I don't think it's ethical. People are allowed to, as I say, that the in this country the only thing is it can't show up in the bloodstream. I never do it. I know other trainers that just don't believe that should be done. That if a horse is requiring any kind of pain relief, he should not be being trained. Full stop. You rest him till he gets better. But I don't think there's any move from the authorities to change the way it is. That's what I'm saying. That there are a lot of people that if there's anything that they can do that think they increase their chances of winning a race, that they'll do. I would like to see intra-articular medication not used at all, but I don't do it. Funny thing was, there's a program Sky Sports Racing now. They used to get me on that at one point, and they had a discussion show on a Sunday morning, and there'd been an old horse that had won a race at the Cheltenham Festival, and this was about May, and the news had come through that it tested positive to one of these things, and I think he'd been getting a bit of arthritis in a hock or something. Anyway, the horse is and the horse was going to be disqualified because they'd obviously given the injection too close to the race. But anyway, of course, the horse's owner said it's ridiculous. This horse is being disqualified. It's lots of people do this and everything. And I knew this was going to come up on the discussion, and I thought, oh, bloody hell! I wish I wasn't a guest this week because I can't not say what I think. I might upset a few people with what I think. But as luck would have it, there was another another guest, a trainer called Gay Calloway, who also trains in Newmarket. And I had no idea what Gay's views on intra-articular medication would be. I'd never discussed it with her. And we actually went over to the studio together, but even then I didn't discuss it with her. And I was anyway, Gay's very outspoken. When it came up, I didn't need to speak because Gay straight away came in. These people should be ashamed of themselves. This old horse, he'd been a wonderful servant to him. He's starting to get a few aches and pains. They should have just retired him. They wanted to run him at another Cheltenham Festival. Hadn't he done enough for them? They were just being greedy. And I was very so. Yeah, as I say, there will be a lot of there will be a sizable amount of trainers who take the same viewpoint as I do, but there will be a sizable amount who think, I would suggest, probably don't think too deeply about it. Don't think any more of the fact. I mean, my view actually is, Bart Cummings' book, he said I was renowned as a patient trainer. And people said, oh, you must be, really kind to the horses. And he said, but primarily, I was a patient trainer because I thought I'd win more races by doing so. If I looked after them as young horses and brought them along slowly, I'd win more. And he said, I think my record in the Melbourne Cup probably proves that. I'm not being totally altruistic. I actually think by looking after your horses, by not exercise, by any time. Well, I would say a little problem generally goes away with rest, but becomes a big problem if you carry on working the horse. And probably one of the reasons I trained so few horses is nothing happens in a hurry with these ones. I can't remember the last 2-year-old I ran. I've run a 2-year-old in the last 8 years or something. And most people who own horses are in a hurry. So I'm very lucky in the owners I trained for allowing me to be patient. But of course, the downside is there aren't that many of them. And most people they'll pick out a trainer on how quickly they push 2-year-olds on. But as I say, I always think long term, I think if you pushed Roy Rocket on, he'd have never won a race. And, he didn't win till he was 5. And we'd have a lot like that. So a large part of my thinking, you've got to look after these horses. So I want to look after them anyway. But I don't find I'm not conflicted because I don't think that counts against my chance of success. I think you'll end up winning more races if you look after the horses. So for me, there isn't this dilemma, either look after them or be successful with them. I think they will achieve their potential if you look after them, so it's no-brainer. But you will have a lot of people in life don't look beyond the end of next week, and they won't be thinking what's if I do A or B, what will increase, under which scenario is the horse more likely still to be winning in 5 years' time. They will be thinking, under which scenario is he likely to win a race before the end of in the next month. So as I say, to me, I'm not conflicted. A lot of people that are in more of a hurry maybe are, but they probably just don't devote too much thought to it. So yeah, that's one change I'd like to see made. And I suspect that most of the regulators don't think about it that deeply. I suspect that they're mostly, well, say politicians, but in theory I'm a politician. But politicians are mostly reactive. They tend to react to the issues that are forced upon them rather than they don't usually go out and say, what subjects can we tackle to make the world a better place? They say, what subjects can we tackle to pacify the electorate, keep things running smoothly? And if you're a politician, a large part of keeping running smoothly means making sure we're still in charge after the next election. But yeah, I think the regulators are as responsible and as proactive as you can reasonably expect regulators to be, particularly when they're not, a lot of them aren't horsemen themselves, and particularly the ones that are horsemen themselves are probably, there's probably a lot of people take a lot of things for granted. It's always been, well, you just got to do that. That's what people have always done. You just got to do it. I was friendly with an old, well, he was actually champion apprentice in the early 30s, old Fred Rickaby, who became a very successful trainer in South Africa. And Fred was very, in one sense, he was very, he rode Hyperion as exercise, and in one sense, he was very old school. But even Fred was, I think, particularly when he went out to South Africa and started training there, they had no support system that he could rely on. You wouldn't have head lads and experienced staff and vets and everything. You had to think of everything through from scratch. And Fred as an old man said to me, the worst type of trainer is the one whose maxim is carry on, Sergeant Major. But the second worst type of trainer is the one whose maxim is it was good enough for the governor, so it's good enough for me. And I think there's probably, in both horsemen and administrators, there's always going to be an element of it was good enough for the governor, so it's good enough for me. But no, I think administrators do as good and responsible a job as you could reasonably expect them to do.
Thanks so much, John. I just wonder if you have time to respond to a practical question for us, because we like to try and have a practical element to the podcast. And one of the things that I'm really interested in is gear. And recently there's been a paper published where authors were quizzing racing experts, and the And the conclusion was that gear has very little effect in practical terms on the welfare of the racehorse. So I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about gear and horse welfare in racing?
Well, I don't know if you've asked the right or the wrong person. It depends on what your perspective is. But yeah, I mean, I don't even like people asking for a neck strap. I want a snaffle bridle and a pair of reins. I don't want people asking for a noseband, a neck strap, blinkers, a tongue tie. I do use blinkers on the odd occasion because I find that there are some horses who are real slow learners, and you start working them and you think, this just won't concentrate. He went past the 3 furlong pole and he shied at that, and they do get distracted. You've inexperienced horses that they do get distracted, and you do use them. I tend to find those type of horses, once they get a bit more experience, they don't no longer need the blinkers. But yeah, you do get odd horses that you think, oh, this horse just won't take it seriously. He shouldn't be going up the gallop and then just turning around to look at something else. So we do have the odd horse that runs in blinkers, but I don't make gear changes unless I have to. And the standard set of gear for me is a snaffle bridle. But hoods have become very popular. Never owned a hood, never will. Oh, but it is the emperor's new clothes, and it's obviously, you see everyone's looking over their shoulder to see what someone else is doing. In the mid-80s, there was a great mare in Europe called Triptyque, and she raced in a ring bit, and she won a few big races in a ring bit. Suddenly everyone was wearing a ring bit, and you see Godolphin or Aidan O'Brien will put something on, and suddenly everyone's putting one. Hoods are becoming a big thing. The great thing is I wouldn't even say we, because it's probably the generation before me. Hoods have become very popular in racing. Absolute bollocks. The previous generation used to use hoods a lot. We called them nightcaps. And when I came into racing in the early 80s, you still did. On cold days, the horses would exercise, particularly cold, wet days. They'd have a nightcap on, which would keep their ears warm. Bill O'Gorman, a retired trainer, says he makes some very good observations. He summed it up in one of his books. He said, when we did, no one noticed the horses behaving any differently. I think an awful lot of it is people like, in anything you like to be seen to be doing something, people will say, oh God, isn't he? He's very thorough. I see and I just say, oh. So yeah, I don't use anything. It's very, very rare for me to use a bit anything other. If a horse hangs in a race, I do like to use the ring bit that Triptyque use. Just stops the bit moving through the mouth. And if you get a horse that gurgles at the end of a race, and they tend to do it when they're pulling up, sometimes soft palate can just become detached and flap around. I will probably try a tongue strap on them, because I'm not convinced that this actually works, but the logic is that if you keep the tongue low down, there's less chance of it itself getting back in the mouth and dislodging the soft palate. I actually don't think that's what causes it. And I find most people that, I've never have a wind operation. I'm like Willie Mullins, never have them. But so many people. I tend to find if you've got a horse gurgling, if you're gurgling today, keep training them. They probably won't next month. It's a sign of unfitness as much as anything else. And I often find horses that like fast ground, if you run them on soft ground and it's a real effort for them, it's almost like they give up. I used to do a lot of cross-country running, and I sometimes find if you get demoralised at the end of a race, you're breathing, you'd almost like, you got half a mile to go and the leaders have got away from you. You'd just lose your whole rhythm, and you'd start, your breathing would get out of rhythm and everything. And yeah, and if you've got a horse that actually has got a wind problem, i.e. its larynx doesn't open and shut, there's nothing you can do to get his breathing functioning as effectively it would do if the larynx open and shut normally. So, I mean, I just don't have wind. I just don't use them. Keep it simple. But well, I mean, the next generation. But again, it's accepting things as axioms. It's good enough for the government. It's good. We see other people doing it, and they do it without question. And the greatest trainer in Britain in my lifetime has been Martin Pipe, as a complete innovator. Certainly the greatest at winning races and getting horses to overachieve. He always said his big advantage was he'd never worked for another trainer, so he had no received wisdom. So he had to think everything through. But people don't. It's just they see other people doing it, and they see other people doing it, not realizing that the people who are doing it for no good reason, so they do it. But I say to other people when we start going about herders, I always say, well, St. Vincent O'Brien and Noel Merlis did okay without any of this nonsense, didn't they? And we haven't quite reached the stage of people looking at me and saying who, but that time, I think we're getting close enough. They just look at me blankly and think, what an idiot.
Can I ask you a sneaky question just before we finish?
Yeah.
Would you ever consider running a horse bitless without a bit?
No. I did. Someone made a bitless, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, came up with this bitless bridle. And there was a racecourse vet in the north of England that liked the idea of them, and he asked me to try exercising that. And I exercised a few horses using this bitless bridle, and it worked fine. We had control. I mean, I didn't put it on any really difficult horses. I did only use the horses that are pretty easy to ride, which is most of them. But I wouldn't feel a need to change, because I don't regard a bit as a problem. I mean, a bit's a problem in certain hands, but you know, if you've got an unsympathetic rider, anything's going to be a problem in your hand. I never use a bit and feel that there should be a better way of doing it, because I don't feel it works, and I don't think horses are unhappy with bits. You know, you don't want to be rough on horses. Great phrase that I was always used was treat the reins like they're made of silk, and not put. I don't like riding on a loose rein, but I never want the rein to be any tighter than it needs to be. So no, the answer is I wouldn't. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, and I don't regard using a bit as something that's broke.
It was more from there's some evidence to suggest that the bit is related to the wind problems in racehorses. So it's not so much about pulling on reins and things. It was more about breaking that seal of the lip with the bit is thought to be related to some of the wind problems that racehorses have. That's why I was asking.
Yeah, I can't see it. I mean, a wind problem is when the larynx doesn't open and shut. And when the larynx doesn't open and shut, it's not the bit that's stopping it. It's because the muscles that open it up don't work. Or it's not open and shut, it's permanently shut. It doesn't open. The muscles cease to work. That's what I regard as a wind problem. You know, the number 2 wind problem is gurgling, which tends just to be a temporary thing. Do it when the horse gets very tired, gets demoralised, isn't fit enough. As I say, I think there's zero connection between a bit and a horse's larynx not functioning. And the other wind problem, well, they all wear bits, and very few horses gurgle, but they all wear bits. And when they stop gurgling, it isn't because you've changed. It isn't because you've stopped using a bit on them.
Like, when you say you hear them gurgle, do you know what that is? Because I've never heard a horse do it.
It's a soft palate flapping around. You know, the vet can stick a scope in there, and he'll say, "Oh, your soft palate becomes detached where it should be. It becomes detached, and it flaps around, and the noise you hear is the soft palate flapping around." Okay. But I mean, that can happen. The vet can scope. If in really bad cases, the horses that just do it, they can do it while they're stationary, and the vet can scope them at rest. when they don't have a bit in their mouth, and it will just become detached. So yeah, I can't see. I mean, wind problems are a very, very small issue. If it, I mean, they just aren't a problem.
No, it's fine. I was just curious. Yeah.
I would say once every 3 years or so, we will have a horse whose larynx stops working, his larynx stops opening and closing. And I used not to understand it, because I'd say we'd have a 5-year-old, and I'd say, well, I bought this at the yearling, had a wind test, and he said, no, the larynx is no different to any other working part on a horse or a human or anything else. When you're young, everything works fine, and you go through an athletic life and things that wear and tear, and it's just, particularly when a horse has to work hard, the larynx muscles, they start to deteriorate. But it's, as I say, about once every 3 years, you find the horse, you hear him whistling on the gallop, and you scope him, and his larynx isn't opening, and we just retire them when they do that. It's the occasional horse that it happens to eventually. The vast majority of horses reach retirement and their larynx hasn't started to deteriorate. So no, I mean, of all the physical problems can come up with a horse, a wind problem is just it's number 52 on the list or something.
John, this has been a fascinating conversation. I don't think we've covered half the topics we probably should have, or that our listeners would like to hear you talk about. But I think it's been a really interesting insight into so many things: history of racing at Newmarket, and life at Beverly House Stables, and Fred Rickaby. I could go on and on, but thank you so much for being a guest here today.
Oh no, I've enjoyed it. Well, I like the sound of my own voice, so yeah. But it's actually, there's no harm in articulating what might be floating around in your own mind, because things float around in your own mind, and it's what I say about thinking things through. If you actually have to articulate it, it probably clears things up that you're thinking either might or might not be the case. So no, I've enjoyed the discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you for asking me.
Thanks so much, John. Hey everyone, it's Karen. Thanks for listening, and we really hope you loved the show today. You can support the show by liking and subscribing, and of course, if you write a review, that will help other people find the show. We are always looking for ways to make the show better, so if you have an idea for the show, have a question you would like us to answer, or there's someone you'd like us to interview, then please send us an email to team@changingrein.com.au. We would love to hear from you, and thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.